Welcome to Behind the Blue Lines, a special segment of Unplanned and Untold, where we revisit some of our most compelling interviews to provide a space for reflection and education while uncovering the complexities that surround an unplanned pregnancy. Welcome back to another episode of Behind the Blue Lines, where we take a deeper dive into recent episodes of Unplanned and Untold. On today's unique episode, we're going to be taking a closer look at the often misunderstood and complex world of adoption. Today, we have two amazing guests with us. First is Riley Cowell. She's a licensed master social worker and the director of maternity services for Agape of Central Alabama. And next, we have Kelly Curry, director of clinical services for Agape. She's a licensed board certified independent clinical social worker and is certified for private independent practice of social work in the state of Alabama. Ladies, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks for having us.
Oh, I'm so excited to have y'all on. And honestly, Riley, I couldn't help but notice that you have your bachelor's degree from Auburn. Is that right?
That's right.
War Eagle.
War Eagle.
And Kelly, you got your master's from that other school in the state.
Yes, but still an Auburn fan, so War Eagle.
Okay. We'll be gentle on you if you're still an Auburn fan then. Oh my goodness. Well, this episode is really important to me because our listeners had a lot of questions about a previous episode we did with Kelsey. She was a previous student mom that placed her child for adoption, and listeners really haven't had a chance to dive into the intricate world of adoption. And if you haven't listened to that episode, you ought to go back. I think it's like 2 episodes previous from this one. It's an amazing story, and it stirred up a lot of questions about the adoption process. So thank you for coming on and helping us kind of navigate through all these questions.
Yeah, of course.
So I think the first question and the most prominent question is, what are the different types of adoption? I mean, a lot of our listeners are probably millennial aged or a little younger. So we've seen shows like Teen Mom, and we've watched women like Caitlin and Tyler place their child for adoption and got a little glimpse of what that looks like. But can you kind of explain to us the different types of adoption?
So in regards, I'm assuming to open, closed, and semi-open.
Yes.
Is that what we're talking about? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So open adoptions would be that post placement, there's direct contact between birth families and adoptive families. So usually there's an exchange of direct email or in-person visits or phone calls or whatnot. So they're communicating directly.
Okay.
And then closed would be no contact between the two parties. And then semi-open would be contact that only exists between like a third party. So an attorney or agency. So there's kind of a middleman between communication between both.
Okay.
And
So
I would say, yeah,
go
ahead. Sorry.
who chooses the type of adoption? Is it the birth mother, or is it an agreement between both parties?
Yeah. Well, and I would say, of course, adoption practices it varies greatly based on what agency or attorney you use. But for we at Agape, all of our services are wrapped around our maternity clients. So we really strive to honor whatever desire in regards to openness that she has. And all of our adoptive families have to agree to some sort of openness, because we know from the research that's been done now that open adoptions are best for the adoptee. So that's what we really push for. And really just generally with like all the things that we have now, genetic testing, Facebook, social media, there's really no such thing as a completely closed adoption, because if someone wants to find out information, it's out there. So we also, of course, educate all parties about that as well. But for us at Agape, we require there to be some sort of openness within adoption placements.
That makes sense. I mean, with how much social media has taken over the world, it is just too easy to dig and deep dive and probably find people that may not want to be found in certain situations. So I can totally see why y'all have adapted that, somewhat open adoption plan and why you back it so heavily. So who is the mediator between, if it is open or semi-open, who is the mediator between the two parties? Is it y'all? Is it a court system?
Yeah. So I think that is one of the great benefits of going through a really ethical agency. We tell our families and our maternity clients that we are there long term. So regardless of, if it's a week post adoption placement or 15 years post adoption placement, we are there in whatever capacity the triad wants us to be there. So in general, if it's a semi-open adoption, the maternity client will have a maternity advocate present to help with that, and the adoptive family will have an adoption social worker there to help with that as well.
Okay. And Kelsey spoke about being presented with books of families so that she had, the choice on who she felt was best to place her daughter with. Is that how it is across the board? How do birth mothers pick these families?
Riley, you want to talk about that one?
Sure. So in general, that's usually our first presentation of families. That's the first step that we take in actually seeing families. But before that even happens, we have long been having conversations, depending on how long she has been working with us and how long she's been interested in adoption and leaning towards adoption. When we get to the place of choosing a family, we put her in the driver's seat. So we have been having conversations about her preferences for a family, family composition, location. Another big factor in that is contact post placement. So what does openness look like? What does she want it to look like in her, best case scenario? This is the relationship she would want to have with the family, and this is what they would be like. And from there, we as the maternity team will communicate on her behalf to our adoption team about her requests, and then they will let us know which families match what she's looking for. And the first step is showing her books. That's just been the easiest way to have an entry level introduction to a family that's sort of low pressure.
Sure.
And she will look through all of the books that match what she's looking for. And from there, it's totally up to her. Sometimes we have women who will look at a book and feel immediately drawn and be like, that's it. I know this is the family. I feel so connected to them already. Wow. Other times we'll have women who will look at books and say, these two really stand out to me. Can I meet them? Or maybe that feels a little intimidating. Can you help me set up a phone call with them? Can I ask them certain questions? Can we do a Zoom call? So it really just depends on what she's looking for. But yes, showing books is usually the first step to that. And we walk with them through that. So we're sitting down together, we're processing, and they know that we're there just for them. We're not representing the adoptive family. So we're like, listen, you may not like any of these families, and that's okay too. So whatever you feel is right, and that's what we're going to go off of.
Wow, that's amazing that you really are her advocate and that she has somebody to walk with her through this life-changing decision. Now, does she pay for your services? How does that work?
Yeah, no, she doesn't. So all of our services for our maternity clients are completely free, and they're all the same. So we work with women who are either unsure about what their plan is, what they feel is best for themselves and their child, whether that be parenting, adoption. They may feel torn, or they may say, I really want to parent, but I have all these barriers. I just don't know how I'm going to make it work. And if I don't make it work, I don't know what I'm going to do. And then we have some women who come in and feel strongly initially that they're leaning towards adoption, and they feel like they want to walk down that path and start exploring that. And regardless of what they're telling us the plan is, we're offering the same services, and it's all free of charge. So she could change her mind at any point. Our services and our support stays the same, and there's no now, you owe us anything in return. It's just a free service.
Absolutely. So this was a common question we got. Do the birth mothers receive any type of compensation when working with an agency other than, like you said, you're walking through this process with them? Is there any type of monetary compensation for her?
Yeah, so it depends. It depends on the agency. It depends on their practices. In general, kind of taking a step back in our federal laws, there's laws against what they call child buying.
Okay.
So there's some laws in place to protect basically from child trafficking, where you can't pay money in exchange, receive a child.
Okay.
But outside of that, there's also in the law room where it is seen as appropriate for certain expenses to be covered during a pregnancy.
Okay.
And we're very careful and intentional with the way that we do that, as ethically as possible. But we do offer some financial assistance. And again, that's regardless. So she could be wanting to parent, or she could be wanting to make an adoption plan. Depending on her circumstances, what's going on, we can offer some financial assistance.
Okay.
It's something that we, work on together. We make a plan together. How can we set you up for success long term, not just during your pregnancy? We want you to be successful after that, whatever that looks like. And so there's a lot to it, but there is financial assistance available.
Okay. And as far as I'm assuming, like, hospital visits, things like that, preterm care, what if the mother doesn't have insurance? How does, all of that aspect work?
Yeah, that is one of the things, very first things we talk about in intake.
Okay.
So, do you have insurance? Are you receiving benefits that are available to you? If not, we're going to help you get set up on all of those and help connect you to a doctor, help
Okay.
you make it to your appointments, all of that. So, if we have a situation where a client has gotten to the point in her pregnancy where she's in the hospital delivering the baby and has still not gotten insurance or not been able to get insurance, there are hospital social workers that assist with that in the hospital.
Okay.
And it's something that we can do as well. And depending on the state, it can also be retroactive to cover your whole time in the hospital. And then there are some cases we've had where they have had their own insurance, but have had co-pays, and we can help with things like that as well. It just kind of depends on the situation. But that is one of the first things that we're addressing.
Absolutely. Because her health and the baby's health is super
Yeah,
important to
right.
y'all and to her as well. And that's a beautiful thing that you're providing. Now, have you ever had a mom change her mind? Let's say they get to the hospital, baby's here. Well, number one, how long does she have to say, actually, I don't think I want to go through with this? And what does that process look like once that decision's made?
Yeah, so it definitely has happened. I've walked with women through that process multiple times. It's not as uncommon as it used to be, certainly. I'll say, as far as the time period she has to change her mind after signing papers. So, of course, she can change her mind anytime before she signs papers. But once we have signed those legal documents where she's relinquished her rights, it depends on the state. So, there are some states where when the ink is dry, your time is up, so it's instant and it's irrevocable. In Alabama, where we work, we actually just got revisions in the legislature to the adoption code, and now our clients have 5 business days.
Okay.
So, for example, if she signs papers on a Friday, she has until the following Friday, in the case that there's no holidays or anything like that. So 5 business days, day 1 starting the next day.
Okay.
I will say that in my experience, there's no one size fits all to women who are choosing adoption. Every story is so unique and different. What I have seen is one of the biggest factors, if it's not the biggest factor, is the level of support that they have is a huge determining factor in them making an adoption plan. So that could be support they have from their family, from their community, from their employment, from their partner, from what resources are available, what childcare is available, where they're living. If they're in a really rural place where there's no public transportation, that's a huge barrier to stability and finding a job, keeping a job, getting kids to the doctor, all of those things. So the level of support they have interpersonally, in their relationships, and in their community, it cannot be understated. It's really, our clients are thinking on all of these levels because they want to give this child the very best life that is possible.
And the unique part about Agape, y'all walk through that parenting process with them if they choose not to place their child for adoption. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something that we restate to them all the time. If you change your mind, I'm still going to be here. Nothing is going to change. So if you've been planning on adoption this whole time, we've been choosing families, we've been talking about openness, we've also been working on your life goals at the same time. You change your mind, we're still going to be working on these goals. Nothing's changing. And so we have so much space for empathy and compassion and understanding when moms change their mind, because you can do all of this planning during your pregnancy and you hold this baby for the first time. Maybe it's your first delivery, maybe it's not, but labor is never easy. You've done the hard thing. You've done the even harder thing of signing away your rights to this child. You're going to leave the hospital empty-handed. And so that changes everything. The moment that you hold that baby, meet that baby, it changes everything. And so for those circumstances where she changes her mind, it's met with support really from the whole team, but certainly for those of us working directly with her, it's not uncommon, but it's completely understandable. And we expect that it's going to happen at some point for, the course of being in this field. And we can completely understand and have empathy for that.
Wow. I'm learning a lot, honestly, as you're speaking, because I do feel like there is this tabooness of adoption agencies sometimes. I'm feeling like maybe they're misunderstood, especially when they aren't offering services post baby. It almost sounds transactional when it's okay. You've placed your baby for adoption. We're done here. Doors closed, when in actuality, that mom still has a long road ahead of her, and could use somebody advocating for her, whether she chooses to place the baby for adoption or chooses, hey, never mind, I want to parent this child. My mind is blown that your agency walks with her regardless of her decision.
Yeah, I will also be like fully transparent in saying that I can't speak for any other agency. And I also want to validate that this is not the experience that many women have working with either different agencies or attorneys, or what they call adoption facilitators, adoption brokers. There's all these different terms that you may find on a quick Google search. Hey, I'm pregnant and I need help. And you may get connected with someone who is not there for you. And so that I want to normalize that too and validate that experience, because unfortunately that's super common. But in our work, we are just very intentional and are very careful. And we have our whole, agency designed in a way that is centering on the most vulnerable. And so all of the decisions that we make are through that lens.
Absolutely. Now, switching gears a little bit, talking about the birth fathers. This question came up a bit too. What are a birth father's rights? Let's say the birth mother decides she wants to place her baby for adoption and he disagrees. Does he have any rights to combat placing that child for adoption or fighting for parental rights?
Yeah, absolutely. So he has exactly the same rights as she does to parent a biological child.
Wow.
There are some more hoops for him to jump through as far as establishing DNA, and he needs to be present and he needs to be voicing his opinion, hiring his attorney to help protect his rights, or there's a whole putative father registry that if you think you might have been with someone who became pregnant, you can register for if a child is born, and if an adoption plan is made, you can be notified. So there's all these different protections in place.
Wow.
But he has the same rights. And so part of the process, and I don't know how much we want to get into the weeds, but part of the process in addressing his rights is for the adoption attorney to take upon herself, and that happens in communication with the birth mom, the information that she provides about him to us, what we're made aware of, and that information helps address his rights as well. So again, depending on the agency, depending on the attorney that you work with, adoption plans are safest when they're by the book, and we're not trying to get around his rights. We're trying to do everything we can to address everyone's rights. And if a child can stay with biological family, we don't necessarily want to fight that either. The other side of that is when there's a safety issue. So if there's been a concern about violence, and if birth mom feels that it would not be safe for him to be contacted for herself or the child, there's certain protections, and attorneys can kind of approach that in a way to keep everyone protected while still satisfying the court's mandates for addressing his rights. So there's some nuance to it, but the short answer is he has the same rights. The long answer is the way that those rights are addressed can look different ways.
Wow. Okay. And switching gears once again, we did get a lot of questions about the adoptive families and when adoptions fall through. My question to you would be, do you work one-on-one with those families? And if a mom chooses not to place her child for adoption anymore, even after she said, like, yes, this is the family gets fully prepared for this baby, and, maybe it's within that 5-day window, what is your experience with these adoptive families when an adoption falls through?
Yeah, that's when our adoption team comes in. So I'll let Kelly speak to that.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, I think first and foremost, you have to look kind of at the values of the agency. So like at Agape, we are very clear at initial contact with families that we are not an agency that's going to be searching for a baby for you. Like kind of in regards to adoption practices, our maternity clients come first, and our adoptive families are there for if an adoption plan is truly needed and she truly wants that. So, and they are told that from the very beginning, which kind of is a mind shift for a lot of adoptive families. And then just throughout the home study and education process, they are educated so well. And I have to brag on our families because we've had many families that have walked through that. We have one family that had walked through that twice. And so they are trained from the very beginning, first of all, to have love and empathy for our maternity clients. So most of our families like truly have a heart and desire for her to succeed and for her to parent if she at all can. So of course, when that happens, especially if they've already been caring for the baby, there's a complexity of emotion. But because that training came up front, and again, because they have their own social worker to help them walk through that grief with them, most times our families say things like, well, of course she wants to parent. This is her baby. That's where this baby belongs. And honestly, that is what makes us the most proud in our adoptive program, in our adoption program, when families get there and they truly get it. So, even though, of course, there's all these emotions that come up with it, generally our families are prepared so well that they walk past that knowing that that's where that baby is supposed to be, and they champion her. And we've even had families that have stayed in contact with those moms, and they have almost like an aunt or uncle relationship with them. So, and that's really powerful. That's what we want. You know, we want our maternity clients to have an expanded support network. And when that can be an adoptive family that she was initially matched with, like, what is better than that, you know? So I think part of that comes like before a child is even placed with an adoptive family, just in the training process and shifting, helping educate and shift minds of what that might look like.
Absolutely. You're laying a foundation for both parties that honestly is new to my understanding. You know, I think there is this misunderstanding that adoption agencies are here searching for children for their clients who've paid them money, and, you know, they're trying to match up with other moms. But what I'm hearing from you is it's actually the complete opposite. How y'all work, how your agency works, is it's the mother first, and these families know it's the mother first, and they get on board with that type of thinking. And so that is such a beautiful way to incorporate two different pieces of the puzzle together.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that, you know, that piece is what makes, again, when adoption is necessary, that helps make adoptions ethical, you know, which is like
Right.
what we are always striving to do, to be better and, you know, to make sure our most vulnerable populations are served well. So,
Absolutely. Now, this was an interesting question that I had gotten. What happens if a mother backs out? Does the family get their money back, or do they have to continue to pay to work with another adoptive mother?
yeah, Riley, you want to start that, or you want me
Yeah.
to?
Well, yeah, and Kelly can talk from, you know, the perspective of the working with the adoptive family when that happens. I will say, from my understanding, my experience in this field, that depending on, again, the agency who you're working with, that is something that can be threatened and weaponized against women who
Mhm.
are on the path of choosing adoption, have chosen a family. Certain agencies will say, okay, great. Now that you have, you know, chosen a family, we're going to cover your apartment for the next 6 months until you deliver. You get closer to that 8 months, she may be really reconsidering or just having some doubts, which is, of course, understandable and natural.
Absolutely.
And that might be met with, well, you know, we've spent a lot of money, and if that happens, you're going to need to pay us all back. So I won't say that that doesn't happen. I know that it does. And again, why we're so intentional about the way that funds are used. And then I'll let Kelly talk about how that's communicated on the adoption side.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think first of all, just to back up, one thing that's very different about Agape is no fee that we take from an adoptive family or that we charge an adoptive family is tied directly to an adoptive placement.
Okay.
So like Riley said, most agencies, attorneys, and facilitators, they match adoptive families and maternity clients early on, and then that adoptive family starts paying for those expenses very early
Right.
on. And we don't do that for so many reasons, but
Mm.
but primarily because when that happens, there's a power dynamic shift.
Mhm.
And then that makes it so much more difficult for a mom to change her mind,
Right.
logistically, and potentially having to pay those funds back. But
Right.
also, she begins to think, oh man, like they've paid for all this. I need to move forward with this plan because of X, Y, and Z that they've done for me. So we intentionally don't do that. So the way Agape's fees are set up is families who are in our adoption program, of course, they pay fees, and generally those fees are for a specific service rendered. But their main fees go into basically a pot, go into an account. And then that's where, for all of our maternity clients, regardless of whether or not they've ever considered an adoption placement or creating an adoption plan, those funds are what is used for our maternity program to be able to cover expenses as needed and as warranted, to be able to help her create independence in the long term. So because of that, I think that really helps with just, you know, the money back and forth, and the whole question of whether families get their money back if she backs out. We don't really have to worry about that because of the way that our fee structure is set up.
Wow. And it protects both the mother and the families in that
Yes.
experience at the same
Yes.
time. That is really groundbreaking because I know that can be scary. It's a lot of money. It's a lot of money to invest. And I've met, families before that adoptions have fallen through, and it was just, that was it. The money was gone and it was on to the next. And I know how heartbreaking that can be, but also the pressure of a birth mother to have to think about, possibly paying things back if she's working with an agency that works like that, or feeling that guilt of they've done so much for me, they've provided so much, but now, I feel like I can do this. What do I do? That's a horrible position to be put in. And so this is really amazing that you take that out of the equation for both parties.
Yes, yes. And one of the unintended consequences of doing it the way that you described is that when families are matched and
Right.
then a mom changes her mind, then that creates like a lot of trepidation and fear in those families for any mom
Yes.
that they're matched with moving forward. So
Yes.
we've just kind of taken all of that out of the equation in large part to preserve like long-term relationships because relationally we want openness for
Mm.
the betterment of that adoptee. So we've just found that that is the most ethical way to go about like money exchanging hands and fee structures and all of that.
Absolutely. So, my last question to y'all would be, in your experience, what are some things to look for in regards to an ethical adoption agency? What should either, birth mothers or families that are looking to adopt be looking for in an agency?
I love that question. That is such an important question. I have a few things that I'll talk about and then I'll put it to Riley. I
Sure.
think one of the first things is having a really holistic and ethical maternity program,
Okay.
because you can't have ethical adoptions without serving our maternity clients really, really well. So that is
Mhm.
number one. You have to have, on the flip side, a really ethical and robust maternity program. Another thing that I think is really important is elevated adoptee and maternity client birth family experiences and voices. I think that that is so important. There's so many birth moms out there now who have walked through this process, so many adoptees, myself being one of them. And I think
Mm.
for an agency or an attorney to really elevate those voices and learn from those lived experiences is really, really, really vital and important in shaping an ethical adoption program. And then some of the other things we've kind of talked about are that fees are not tied directly to placements, I think is huge. And then separate advocacy and representation for each member of the adoption process. So for the adoptive family and for the maternity client, you need separate representation and separate advocacy to make that go really well and just ensure that there's no bias happening across the
Right.
board. So, but Riley, I'm sure you have other things too.
Yeah, and it's something that we take extremely seriously and something we talk about all the time and pushing ourselves, like, what can we do better? This is the program we have now. Can we take it a step further, push ourselves more, think outside of the box, get creative in ways to be even more ethical and centering on the vulnerable and considering what is coming out in the research and what we know, what's best practice now and adjusting. So it's something I have a lot to say about, and I won't take up too much time, but I think 4 main areas for expectant women to consider when looking for ethical adoption practices. So one of those is whenever possible, depends on the state, but whenever possible, you want an agency who offers post-adoption contact agreements. So get in writing a contract between birth mom and adoptive family, what that contact is going to look like. Unfortunately, in Alabama, that's not a right that's protected right now. And so in that case, a question for you to ask an agency is, what are you going to do to protect my desires for openness?
Mm.
So what does that look like in your agency? What is my voice going to be heard? And what do you do to advocate for me and what I want? So that's one thing. 2, touches on same thing as Kelly. So you want to be asking the person you're speaking to who they're representing. Are they working directly with adoptive families, or is it a completely separate program where their advocate, their social worker is just working for them and on their behalf and advocating for them. So separate representation, where possible. I think that also goes for legal representation. So it's not been common in adoption services for expectant women choosing adoption to have their own legal representation. It's an extra cost that they feel is unnecessary often. And so, one, if it's not automatically offered to me, if I request it, can I get separate legal representation? Because it's a complex legal decision that's permanent. And so you want to be fully informed. So on the agency side, you want to be making sure that you have your own social worker. Legal side, you want to see if it's not automatically offered for legal representation, can I request it and get it?
Those are some amazing tips for all of our listeners, whether they're considering adoption or, considering placing their child for adoption. And I just want to thank the two of you for taking the time to shed light on a topic that can be misunderstood and has some tabooness around it. I really hope that through this conversation, we are able to shed light on adoption and bring a greater awareness to the process. So thank you for being so vulnerable and for bringing your expertise to the table today.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you so
for having
much.
us.
And to all of our listeners, we hope to have you back for our next episode of Unplanned and Untold. Bye-bye. We hope you enjoyed that episode, as we are committed to bringing you the real, raw stories of those who have defied the odds and achieved their goals. But we're not stopping there. We are dedicated to improving our podcast quality so that we can reach an even wider audience. If you believe in the power of these untold narratives, consider donating or sponsoring this podcast by visiting unplannedanduntold.com.